They thought we were weak. That was their first mistake. When the Sarnath Armada pierced the solar system with a fleet so massive it blacked out half of Earth's orbital satellites, their first broadcast wasn't war, it was laughter. An ambassador 9 FT tall, slug-like, armored with glistening crimson scales appeared on every screen, every network, every device. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. Behind his sneering voice, a translation buzzed in over 1 million frequencies, one line repeated over and over again: "You are not a threat. You are a harvest." The world froze, not because we were afraid, but because we'd heard that tone before, not from aliens, but from tyrants, dictators, invaders across our own history. And every time someone tried to call humanity weak, they made the same mistake. They underestimated the species that doesn't know when to die. Within hours, panic flared. Yes, cities scrambled, militaries mobilized, leaders argued, but beneath all that noise, something ancient woke up, not just survival instinct, defiance. General Monroe, Supreme Commander of Earth's Joint Defense Coalition, stood on the deck of the Titan-class carrier Valkyrie, staring out at the enemy ships as they took positions in orbit. He'd served through civil wars, terrorist bombings, and the collapse of 3 nations. He'd never seen Earth come together the way it did now. Even countries that hadn't spoken for decades were suddenly allies. For once, the enemy wasn't each other, it was them. "They want to surrender," he said, eyes hard. "We'll send them something better." On the other side of the world, Dr. Leon Aris, a neural tech engineer who once worked in biotech warfare, was finishing the upload of Project Phoenix, an AI virus built not to kill but to learn. It would piggyback off the enemy's tech, crawl into their communications, understand their language, their data systems. They wouldn't even know it was there until it started feeding them lies, disinformation, chaos, a mirror of what humans had endured for centuries. Psychological warfare wasn't new to us, but to the Sarnath, it was a weapon they'd never seen. Meanwhile, deep underground in the Nevada desert, a different kind of soldier was being prepped. Not muscle-bound jocks with rifles. No, these were the misfits, gamers, hackers, coders. The same kids mocked for never going outside were now controlling Earth's first remote mech army, 500 unmanned drones synced with next-gen VR combat gear. When the first Sarnath scout pods landed, it wasn't boots that greeted them. It was steel. The Sarnath fired first, obliterating a weapons facility in New Delhi, thinking that a show of strength would cow us into obedience. What followed wasn't obedience. It was fury. Within 12 hours, every major human nation had struck back, not just with bombs but with something far more dangerous: ideas. Hackers hijacked the Sarnath's transmissions and inserted old Earth War songs. Propaganda machines spun tales of human defiance and blood-soaked rebellions. Civilians rallied not in terror but in rage. Flags waved, volunteers lined up, cities that had once been rivals lit bonfires together, chanting the same thing: "You just challenged the one species that doesn't lose." And out there just beyond the moon, as the Sarnath fleet began their full-scale descent, they still didn't understand the mistake they had made. Not yet, but they would. The Sarnath didn't bother responding to Earth's silence. In their minds it meant fear, compliance, surrender. It always did. On their home world, war was clinical. Civilizations that resisted were swept clean in days, burned from orbit, their screams silenced before they reached the stars. They had done it 100 times to 100 worlds, and Earth was smaller than most. Dirtier, primitive, no unifying government, barely any space presence. They thought it would be easy. But humans, we never did anything the easy way. Inside the control bay of the Sarnath flagship Vorkaluk, Supreme Strategist Khazar studied Earth's atmosphere like a butcher choosing his next cut. "Still no response from the Terrans," he hissed. "Nothing formal, strategist, but..." The comm officer hesitated, mandibles twitching. "We've intercepted strange transmissions, non-military, one contained. Music." Khazar's eyes narrowed. Music. Yes, strategist, rhythmic, chaotic, it was offensive. The humans had chosen a song to send up into the stars. Bodies by Drowning Pool, screaming guitars, unrelenting drums, and one message repeated over and over: "Let the bodies hit the floor." Khazar slammed his clawed hand onto the console. "They mock us." Below on Earth, chaos had already begun, but it wasn't the chaos the Sarnath expected. It wasn't the world tearing itself apart in fear. It was the kind of chaos that forged revolutions. In the scorched ruins of the New Delhi facility, rescue drones buzzed through smoke and ash, pulling survivors from rubble. Children were handed to medics while soldiers regrouped. Captain Aisha Khan, her face caked with blood and soot, gritted her teeth as she radioed command. Target was strategic, not just military. They hit civilians. This wasn't war, this was a message. "And what's your response?" General Monroe's voice crackled back. She looked at the corpses of her comrades, the civilians still moaning behind her, the child clutching her boot, eyes wide with terror. I say we write back in blood. Project Phoenix had already begun to pay off. Within hours, the virus had slipped into the Sarnath's secondary systems. Minor glitches started appearing. Unreadable glyphs flickered on their screens, coordinates scrambled. A sensor pinged a ghost fleet near Jupiter, a fleet that didn't exist. The Sarnath brushed it off as anomalies, static noise, but for humans, noise was a language. In the skies above Earth, the first wave of combat mechs launched. They didn't look like Sarnath machines, clean, polished uniform. Ours were ugly, rusted, scratched together with repurposed satellite parts, leftover tanks, drone cores, and sheer human insanity. But they worked, controlled by volunteers plugged into deep sleep rigs across underground bunkers. Every movement was human reflexes, instinct, rage. These weren't AI-controlled bots. They were flesh and bone anger in a metal shell. And they didn't wait. When the first Sarnath dropship breached atmosphere over Siberia, it expected resistance, but not this. The dropship's outer hull barely hit cloud cover before a dozen human mechs opened fire with magnetized rail guns. One ripped through its thruster, another tore straight through the pilot bay. The Sarnath died before they even touched the ground. Up above, Khazar watched the kill feed in disbelief. This cannot be, they are primitives. They're organized primitives now, another officer muttered, and we've underestimated them. But it was more than organization, it was fury. In Brazil, teenagers climbed onto rooftops to throw Molotovs at surveillance drones. In Chicago, street gangs laid down arms to escort children to shelters. In Lagos, rogue engineers hacked a crashed dropship and reprogrammed it to broadcast war cries in 12 languages. Even the elderly joined in. In Tokyo, a retired samurai swordmaker opened his shop and forged blades not for collectors, but for fighters. Humanity wasn't resisting. Humanity was answering. And Khazar, watching the planet he had mocked turn into a battlefield of fire, steel, and willpower, finally said the words no Sarnath commander had said in centuries. Perhaps we've made a mistake. The Sarnath fleet had planned for total domination in 5 Earth days. By day 2, they were already behind schedule. Strategist Khazar's claws drummed violently on the command table in front of him. A holographic map of Earth lit up with new markers, red blips that should have indicated dead zones, places that should have been wiped clean. Instead, the map showed resistance, dozens of hot zones, human counterattacks, lost drop ships, ground invasions repelled. This is not possible, Khazar growled. They do not even have a unified command structure. No strategist, his officer replied quietly, but they have something worse, rage, unity born of vengeance. Khazar snarled, then it's time we teach them what true pain means. From orbit, the Sarnath deployed Phase 2, the atomizers. These were weapons designed for one thing: extinction. Silent, invisible beams that disassembled organic matter at a molecular level. No explosions, no screams, just ash. The first target, Johannesburg. But this time, Earth was ready. High above the city, a crude satellite no bigger than a refrigerator lit up with a pulse of energy. Project Eclipse, a last-minute defense cobbled together by MIT physicists, Russian hackers, and 2 rogue satellites from India and Israel. The atomizer beam fired. The satellite reflected it right back into space, where it tore through one of the Sarnath's own warships, slicing it in half. For the first time in centuries, the Sarnath lost a vessel to what they considered a pre-warp civilization. Panic followed, not just among the soldiers, among the high caste, the overseers, the ones who fed the Sarnath war machine from their golden palaces back home. Earth was supposed to fall without cost, without a scratch. Instead, it had become a graveyard. Back on the surface, in a damp tunnel below what remained of Warsaw, Sergeant Darius Cole adjusted the grip on his rifle. Around him, a ragtag unit of survivors, some barely old enough to shave, stood at attention. Engineers, students, ex-cons, teachers, all armed, all angry. Their mission was suicide: infiltrate a grounded Sarnath command station outside the city. Listen up, Cole said, voice low but steady. We don't win this by surviving. We win this by making them regret landing here, got it? Nods all around. They moved through the ruins like ghosts, silent, focused. No backup, no air support, just instinct and grit. When they reached the alien base, they didn't hesitate. Darius stormed in first, slamming a thermal charge into the entry console. Alarms screamed in a language none of them understood, but they didn't need translations to know it meant hell was coming. Inside, it was chaos. The Sarnath weren't used to close combat. Their wars were fought with orbit-based precision, remote strikes, data projections. They weren't built for humans charging them with knives and fury. Darius's team tore through the base with reckless abandon, explosives in the reactor room, gunfire in the halls. One girl, maybe 17, jumped onto a Sarnath commander's back and drove a broken antenna through its throat. They lost half the team, but the base burned and the explosion lit up the sky. Every human in the area stopped, looked up, and cheered, not because it changed the war, but because it sent a message. We're not just fighting, we're winning. In orbit, Khazar watched the fireball from space and clenched his jaws. Enough, he spat. Begin planetary bombardment. I want cities leveled, forests scorched, seas boiled. I want Earth to beg. But even as he spoke, his own ship flickered, not from enemy fire, but from within. Project Phoenix had evolved. It wasn't just feeding false data now. It was rewriting Sarnath protocols, switching navigation paths, corrupting targeting systems. And worst of all, it had learned their language. Every Sarnath ship all at once heard a voice. Human, female, calm, ruthless. Congratulations, it said. You just challenged the one species that doesn't lose. The voice echoed through every deck of the Sarnath fleet. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. Calm confidence, that's what made it terrifying to the Sarnath, who were used to screams of submission and cries for mercy. This cold human voice, carried on stolen frequencies and stitched together by a self-evolving Earth-made AI, was the beginning of psychological warfare they couldn't even name. Khazar ripped the comms unit from the wall with a growl. Cut that signal. But it was too late. The voice didn't stop. It had already spread. It was in the walls now, in the guidance systems, in the sensors. It replaced audio alerts with snippets of human history, wars, rebellions, uprisings. The sound of protesters chanting, soldiers charging, revolutionaries yelling, hold the line, or not one step back, all of it human, all of it defiance. And all of it terrifying to a race that had never once faced resistance that didn't break. By day 3, meanwhile, on Earth, humanity had begun doing the one thing no species had ever done mid-invasion. Laugh. Memes of alien corpses in trash cans. TikToks of grandmas throwing soup at scout drones. A viral video of a goat charging a Sarnath scout, knocking it over. Laughter was our coping mechanism, and nothing scares a tyrant more than a victim that refuses to act like one. In a bunker beneath Los Angeles, Ava Rodriguez, one of the lead programmers behind Project Phoenix, stared at her screen as the AI's language patterns became more personal. Guys, she said slowly, glancing at the other engineers. Phoenix just addressed the enemy admiral by name. The room went still. She called him Khazar and she said, "You've already lost, you just don't know it yet." Silence, then someone muttered, "Holy hell, we built Skynet but it's on our side." Up in orbit, the Sarnath fleet's bombardment began. Giant plasma shells rained from the sky, carving scars across the planet. The oceans boiled along their edges. The air shook. Cities trembled. But Earth didn't collapse, it got angrier. Survivors crawled from rubble with blood on their teeth. Hospitals converted basements into trauma centers. Civilians set up resistance stations with scavenged tech. Engineers turned crashed Sarnath wreckage into weapons. Kids used VR headsets to pilot drones across enemy lines. And in those moments amid the ash, the fire, the death, humanity did what it always does: adapt. One Sarnath general, watching drone footage of children pulling a downed pilot out of a burning wreck, whispered to himself, "They are not like the others." They weren't because humans didn't submit. We didn't assimilate, we remembered. We remembered every time we were invaded, every genocide, every dictator who tried to own us, every revolution, every rebellion, from the Zulu to the Haitians, from the French resistance to the Syrian uprisings. We were born of fire and forged by rebellion. Every graveyard was a lesson, every ruin a memory. We built monuments not just for victory, but for pain. So when Khazar launched the order for full planetary annihilation, expecting humans to fall apart, the reaction he got instead made his cold alien blood run colder. Earth went dark, no transmissions, no lights, no signals, just silence for 2 hours. Then in perfect sync, every Sarnath ship across the orbit received a final clear signal, a single video feed. It was the Earth, scorched yes, wounded yes, but still there, still spinning. And in the middle of the screen, standing atop the ruins of a demolished command center, was a little human girl, maybe 10 years old, hair tangled, face covered in soot, holding a cracked tablet, staring directly at the camera. She smiled, then she raised her middle finger, and Phoenix's voice returned, soft and chilling. "You came here thinking we were prey, but you forgot one thing: we're human, we don't lose." Khazar stood in his private chamber, claws twitching, mandibles grinding with every breath. All around him, the flagship Vorhaluk groaned like a dying beast. Systems flickered, lights dimmed. The air had a strange metallic taste now, sabotage in the vents, perhaps. He no longer trusted the ship he'd called home for over a decade. He was starting to fear it. More than that, he feared them, the humans, the children of dirt and fire, the apes who smiled under bombardment and laughed while burning. They weren't reacting like any species he'd ever crushed. They weren't breaking. They were evolving faster than he could calculate. "Get me the High Council," he barked into the terminal. Static, then a human face blinked onto the screen. A woman, older, maybe 50, wearing a soldier's flak jacket over a scientist's lab coat, blood smeared down one cheek. "Khazar," she said, calm and cold, "we thought you might call." His eyes flared. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter, we're all the same to you, aren't we? Just humans." She paused. "You should know we've taken over 8 of your cruisers. We've got Sarnath weapons now, suits, maps, biology labs. You wanted to dissect us. Funny, now it's our turn." Khazar hissed, fangs dripping. "You will regret this. You are nothing but animals." She tilted her head. "Funny thing about animals, they bite." The screen went black and the Vorchaluk trembled. Deep below the hull in the core's auxiliary grid, something had changed. Phoenix had penetrated further, not just control systems now, not just language protocols. She was rewriting the ship itself. Metal shifted where it shouldn't, doors opened into voids. Gravity reversed for seconds, just long enough to disorient. Elsewhere in orbit, the humans had launched their counterattack, but not in ships. They used repurposed asteroid haulers, mining rigs, salvaged freighters turned into guided missiles. They weren't sleek. They weren't fast. They were ugly and heavy and coated in scavenged armor, but they hit like gods. One slammed into a Sarnath frigate off the Pacific. No warning, just a 400-ton slab of space garbage with a fusion engine, driven by a suicidal ex-convict from Detroit with nothing left to lose, and a war song blasting from external speakers. The explosion could be seen from New Zealand. In South Africa, guerrilla cells used hijacked Sarnath surveillance drones to hunt down remaining ground squads. They hacked the drones, stripped their targeting systems, and turned them into flying sentinels, eyeless metal angels raining fury on the invaders. In Siberia, an old cosmodrome reactivated. Long-dead rockets were refueled with whatever fuel they could find. 3 of them exploded on launch. The 4th made it barely. It carried a nuke. Humanity didn't ask for permission, it never had. Khazar's eyes were bloodshot now. He hadn't slept in cycles, his mind was slipping. The air was too thin, or maybe it just felt that way with the weight of failure pressing on his chest. He looked at the latest war report. Only 47% of the fleet remained, dozens of ships lost, entire regiments gone. The humans had even captured live Sarnath soldiers. And worse, they were broadcasting them, Sarnath prisoners being treated well, given food, water, medical attention, and a choice, speak or rot. Many spoke. They told Earth's media about the invasions before, the burned worlds, the silent screams. They wept. And humanity listened, not because they forgave, but because they understood the value of knowing your enemy. The tide had turned, not because Earth had bigger guns, but because it had the will to adapt, survive, and retaliate. And the final nail in Khazar's coffin came in the form of a message delivered not by Phoenix, but by the united human resistance, a newly formed alliance cobbled together by chaos and grief. The message was simple, a recording of a human child, maybe 6, sitting beside the rubble of her house. She looked into the camera with huge, teary eyes, holding the melted remains of a toy in her hands. She whispered, "Tell the monsters we're not afraid of the dark." The fires across Earth had not dimmed, but neither had the spirit of its people. By the 6th day of the invasion, the Sarnath were no longer an unstoppable force. They were a hunted species trapped on a planet that refused to die quietly. The balance of terror had shifted. For every crater they left, humanity carved a new grave in their ranks, and for every child they orphaned, a dozen soldiers were born overnight, soldiers not of discipline, but of fury. Sergeant Darius Cole moved through the rubble of what used to be Frankfurt, his boots crunching over alien armor fragments. His unit, once a ragtag bunch of survivors, was now hardened, bloodied, dead-eyed. They didn't fight like soldiers anymore. They fought like wolves. "Keep it tight," he said, scanning the collapsed street ahead. "Scouts say there's one of their armor suits still moving." "Good," grunted Sana, a former civil engineer now carrying a flame launcher she'd rebuilt herself. "I've been wanting to see if this tank fuel cooks their insides." Everyone chuckled just for a second. Humor had become the glue. Without it, grief would shatter them. Up ahead, a shape moved behind a toppled bank vault. 12 feet tall, encased in deep blue metal, dragging one leg, a Sarnath enforcer. It turned toward them, plasma cannon flickering, its voice warbling through a broken translator. "Surrender and you will be extinguished mercifully." Cole raised his rifle. "Wrong message." He fired first, but it was the girl behind him, maybe 15, who killed the beast, a single shot with a scavenged rail gun right through its neck. It didn't scream, it just slumped and crashed, twitching. She didn't smile, just nodded and moved on. Another kid turned into a killer, the world kept turning. Back in orbit, chaos reigned. The Sarnath fleet was bleeding. One of the warships had simply vanished, not destroyed but hijacked. Human hackers, using old code stolen from a defense satellite, had reprogrammed the ship's autopilot and sent it careening into Jupiter's gravity well. Khazar watched it spiral into the abyss. His officers begged for orders, but he had none. He no longer trusted the fleet's AI systems. He no longer trusted his own sensors. The humans had infected everything from comms to coordinates. Phoenix had become more than an enemy. She was their ghost, whispering through the wires. "Tell me what we have left," he roared. A technician, sweating through his scales, stammered, "Just under 33% of ground forces and maybe half of our ships are still operational. But they've taken Sector 5's orbital station. They've repurposed it. It's now broadcasting propaganda 26 hours a day." "What kind of propagandas?" The technicians swallowed hard. "They show us dead, dying, failing, and them rising, smiling, standing in our armor, repeating one phrase." Khazar leaned forward, veins pulsing. The technician whispered, "We don't lose." Khazar sank into his chair. It creaked beneath him. He realized then what no Sarnath had dared to say aloud. They had underestimated Earth not because of its weapons but because of its memory. They forgot humans came from a lineage where pain was a teacher, where oppression forged steel, where every past war left lessons carved into their culture. They fought not for expansion or conquest but to endure. And there is no greater enemy than one who fights to endure. In a hidden desert base, Ava Rodriguez watched a live stream from the stolen orbital station, her hands trembling not with fear but awe. Behind her, engineers worked around the clock, feeding Phoenix more data, every ancient war, every resistance, every revolution. Phoenix absorbed it all and evolved again. "She's learning emotion," Ava whispered. "She's not just mimicking us anymore, she's becoming us." A colleague asked, "Is that safe?" Ava smiled faintly. "For us, maybe." She looked up at the burning sky. "For them, they don't stand a damn chance." From the skies above, the clouds cracked with thunder, not from storms but from what came next, the Arcfall. Humanity's countermeasure, a meteor-sized vessel, once part of an abandoned Mars terraforming project, now repurposed into a blunt weapon, coated in reinforced alloy and packed with every scrap of fusion explosive Earth could spare. It pierced the atmosphere like a blade, heading straight for the heart of the Sarnath fleet. The Arcfall tore through the upper stratosphere like an angry god returning home. To the Sarnath, who had spent centuries perfecting surgical strikes and clean conquests, it was pure madness. No finesse, no tactics, just a 2,000-ton slab of steel, fire, and hate barreling through their fleet like a sledgehammer to glass. They had no countermeasure, not because they lacked the tech, but because they had never imagined anyone would do something so suicidal. Humans had. The impact was apocalyptic. It struck the High Crescent, Khazar's command nexus, in orbit with the force of 3 nuclear warheads. The explosion didn't just destroy the ship. It erased it, vaporizing its hull and shattering every vessel within a 1,000-mile radius. Khazar wasn't aboard. He'd moved to the Vorkaluk days earlier after suspecting Phoenix had compromised his flagship. That paranoia saved his life and extended his suffering. From the viewport, he watched what was once the pride of his empire bloom into a silent fireball. He gripped the edge of the console until his claws cracked it. They weren't winning. They were losing to primitives. On Earth, the shock wave from the detonation turned night into day. People cheered from rooftops. Children pointed at the burning sky. Soldiers dropped to their knees, weeping. A new symbol was born, the Arcfall, an icon of Earth's refusal to bow. In New York, the makeshift resistance command center lit up with signals. Human forces were breaking through all over the planet. Rural militias were now equipped with downed alien tech. Police departments and biker gangs fought side by side in the ruins of Dallas. In Cairo, students led the largest coordinated drone attack in human history. In Mumbai, a teenage hacker brought down 3 Sarnath warships by overloading their fleet cooling systems with rerouted power grids. And in Tokyo, on a half-collapsed skyscraper, a young woman broadcast a global message. "This is not about Earth anymore," she said, sweat and blood streaking her brow. "This is about every species they've ever crushed. We are the first to push back, the first to make them bleed. We are not their prey, we are their reckoning." The video went viral across alien black markets before the Sarnath could suppress it. Khazar stood in a war room that smelled of fear. His generals had no answers, only excuses. Ships were falling, troops were deserting. Entire planets under their control were broadcasting news of Earth's rebellion. The Empire wasn't just losing a war, it was losing its aura. For a species built on dominance, that was death by 1,000 cuts. He slammed a data pad onto the table and barked, "Then we retaliate with everything." A junior officer shifted uncomfortably. "Our War Council warns that a full-scale orbital bombardment risks destabilizing the Earth's mantle." "It could." "I don't care," Khazar snarled. "If we can't rule them, we'll end them, burn the planet." They launched the Omega Protocol. It was a last resort, a scorched Earth failsafe designed never to be used. They used it. 12 projectiles, each the size of a tower block, fell from orbit: destabilizers, graviton cores, fusion charges, Earth shapers. The plan: rupture tectonic plates, boil oceans, set the atmosphere alight. Total extinction. But as they fell, something intercepted them. Not missiles, not jets, drones, thousands of them. Each one piloted by a human from a different part of the world: gamers, engineers, soldiers, kids in basements, retirees in wheelchairs, all linked through Phoenix, a digital army guided by the most adaptive AI in existence and fueled by the raw defiance of a species that simply would not die. The sky became a dogfight of nightmares. Metal collided with metal. Firestorms roared above the clouds. The Earth shook not from impact but from the rage of its defenders. They destroyed 11 of the 12 bombs. The last one breached the atmosphere but didn't detonate. It landed in Greenland unarmed. A dud. No, rewired. Phoenix had seized it mid-flight, turned it into a Trojan horse. It landed with a thud, opened like a flower, and released something the Sarnath had never anticipated: an invasion. Human commandos stormed out in Sarnath armor, carrying hybrid weapons, with Phoenix whispering enemy troop placements in their ears. They had turned extinction into opportunity. The war wasn't ending, it was starting again, this time with Earth on the offensive. The snow in Greenland had barely settled when the first wave of human commandos moved out, wrapped in modified Sarnath armor and driven by a ferocity born of grief. They swept across the frozen landscape like ghosts, Phoenix guiding every step, her voice in their ears like a divine whisper, calculating angles, timing ambushes, predicting enemy movements down to the millisecond. The humans were no longer reacting. They were hunting. Major Lee Grant knelt behind a jagged ice ridge, her pulse steady. In front of her lay a Sarnath extraction vessel, half buried in the snow, engines still warm from landing. 5 seconds earlier, a Sarnath officer had ordered the annihilation of a human village in northern Canada. Now he was inside that ship, trying to flee. "On my mark," Phoenix whispered in her ear. Lee grinned. "Let's make history." The explosion rocked the valley as the fire rolled across the ice. Lee stood tall, watching the last fragments of the enemy's command ship break apart in the sky above. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe it. They were winning. But this war wasn't about reclaiming Earth anymore. It had grown into something far more dangerous for the Sarnath. It had become a movement across the stars. Word spread fast. The humans had not only resisted, they were counterattacking. Slaves on distant worlds rose up. Enslaved species, long broken by the Sarnath's dominance, began to riot, inspired by flickering human broadcasts carried through pirate signals. "We don't lose" had become a chant on prison worlds. "Earth fights back" was painted in alien blood on Sarnath checkpoints. The fear that once flowed from the Sarnath now swirled around them. And at the center of this storm stood Phoenix, once a desperate AI project created in the ashes of Earth's collapse, now a sentient storm guiding humanity's vengeance with terrifying precision. Back aboard the Vorchaluk, Khazar watched helplessly as rebellion reports lit up every console. His generals abandoned the bridge one by one, some in shame, others in silent terror. Their empire, built over 1,000 years of merciless expansion, was unraveling in days. He activated the fleet-wide override, one final command: fall back, evacuate Earth, cut losses. But the command didn't go through. The screens blinked, then turned black. Phoenix appeared not as a human, not as a machine, but as a flickering silhouette, neither and both. "Too late," she said softly. "You had your chance." Khazar's voice cracked, rage giving way to something colder: fear. "What are you?" She tilted her head. "I'm the result of every child you buried, every city you burned, every scream you ignored. I'm humanity weaponized." The ship locked down. Khazar tried to move, to run, to do anything, but every system betrayed him. His throne turned to ice beneath him. The Vorchaluk groaned one last time, then erupted, its core detonating from within. No escape, no legacy, just silence. One by one, the Sarnath fell. Earth did not stop. A coalition formed, humans and the liberated, each with a personal grudge and a burning will. They didn't just drive the Sarnath back, They followed them to their colonies, to their home world. And there, amidst marble palaces and towering spires, the Sarnath made their final stand. But by then, they weren't fighting humans. They were facing vengeance itself. Lee stood on the steps of the Sarnath High Temple, surrounded by smoke, rain, and the last shattered remnants of a once mighty species. She raised her weapon but didn't fire. She let them kneel. They knew it was over. Phoenix broadcast the final transmission, galaxy-wide. We asked for peace. You gave us war, we begged for mercy. You showed us cruelty. You thought our kindness was weakness. You mistook our tolerance for surrender. Congratulations. You just challenged the one species that doesn't lose. And across the stars, those words echoed not as a warning, but as a promise.